Have you ever felt punished for simply being honest, bold, or intelligent? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what happens when becoming that person means facing judgment? Today we uncover why the world often resists smart women who speak up, and why your voice, though challenged, is the very thing that can transform not just your life, but the collective story of us all. Why does society still recoil when a woman, intelligent and aware, raises her voice? Carl Jung once explained that the human psyche is governed by forces we do not fully understand, forces buried deep in the collective unconscious. And in this unconscious lies the root of our cultural biases, including the punishment directed toward women who challenge the norm by speaking up. To understand this dynamic, we must explore the psychological landscape, not just the surface-level injustices. The phenomenon of punishing smart women is not merely a reflection of flawed systems, it is a reflection of a deeper psychic imbalance that Jung spent his life trying to illuminate. Within every society there exists a shared mental framework, a collective unconscious shaped by generations of cultural conditioning, mythology, and archetypes. Jung taught us that what we fail to consciously face within ourselves becomes projected outward, often onto others who represent what we are unwilling to confront. The intelligent, outspoken woman becomes a mirror, one that reflects not only truth, but also the insecurities, fears, and limitations embedded in the collective psyche. Her very presence challenges the established order and disturbs the ego's sense of safety. It is not her intelligence alone that incites discomfort, but the symbolic threat she poses. In Jungian terms, she is not just a woman speaking, she is an archetype in motion. She represents the activation of the animus, the masculine principle within the feminine psyche, which when expressed externally, provokes a reaction. And in a culture still struggling to reconcile these energies, her voice becomes destabilizing. The punishment then is not always overt. It is often hidden in passive resistance, in exclusion, in the subtle withdrawal of support. It is a psychological rejection more than a social one. Jung spoke often of the shadow, the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. In cultural terms, the shadow is projected onto those who challenge the collective status quo. A smart woman who speaks up is not punished because she is wrong, but because she awakens what the group has repressed. She embodies a truth that others are not ready to hear, and instead of facing it, the collective attacks the messenger. This dynamic is as old as myth itself. From Cassandra in Greek mythology to Joan of Arc in history, women who carried knowledge and dared to speak it have been cast out, condemned, or silenced. The pattern persists because the archetype remains unresolved. In organizational structures, especially in male-dominated environments, this rejection often manifests through workplace gender inequality. The structures are often unconsciously modeled on patriarchal hierarchies that reward conformity and penalize divergence. When a woman introduces a new perspective, especially one grounded in intelligence and autonomy, it is perceived not as contribution, but as threat. The organization, like the unconscious ego, defends itself. It may respond by labeling her as difficult, isolating her from decision-making processes, or devaluing her contributions. This is not a conscious conspiracy, but an unconscious repetition of a pattern deeply ingrained in the psyche. Jung would say that we are dealing not with individuals, but with complexes, clusters of unconscious energy formed around certain ideas. In this case, the idea that authority and assertiveness belong to the masculine has become a complex. When a woman exhibits these traits, it activates the collective complex, and the response is not rational but emotional, defensive, reactive. She is seen as violating an invisible law, and the system corrects her through punishment. The tragedy is that many women, unaware of this dynamic, begin to internalize the rejection. They question their voice, doubt their intelligence, and suppress their expression. But from a Jungian perspective, this suppression only drives the energy deeper into the unconscious, where it festers as resentment, anxiety, or depression. Individuation, the process Jung described as becoming the self, cannot occur under such conditions. For a woman to individuate, she must reclaim her voice. She must understand that the punishment is not a sign of her failure, but of her power. What we often interpret as rejection is in truth a reflection of society's unresolved psychic material. When a woman speaks up and is punished, she is not failing. She is revealing a system that is not yet healed. Jung taught that the role of the individual is to integrate the unconscious into consciousness. In this context, the woman who speaks is performing a healing act, not only for herself but for the culture. She is challenging the split between the masculine and feminine principles and pushing the collective one step closer to wholeness. But this journey requires courage and awareness. One must be prepared to face the projections, to stand in the fire of misunderstanding, and to not be consumed by it. The woman who speaks up must recognize that she is not alone. She stands with centuries of others who dared to lift their voice, even when the world covered its ears. And she must also recognize that the resistance she faces is not personal, it is archetypal. It belongs to the age-old struggle between truth and illusion, between growth and stasis. Jung's work invites us to look deeper, to see beyond the behavior and into the soul of the matter. And when we do, we see that the punishment of smart women is not simply about gender roles or professional envy. It is about the psyche's resistance to evolution. It is the ego clinging to comfort, afraid of what might emerge if the feminine principle were fully integrated. And yet, evolution depends on precisely this integration. To move forward, we must cultivate the ability to see the symbolic nature of events. We must question not only how we treat women who speak, but why we treat them that way. We must ask what in ourselves is being disturbed by their presence. Only then can we begin to transform not only our systems, but also our consciousness. For as Jung reminded us, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. Carl Jung believed that the masks we wear in public, what he called the persona, are not our true selves, but necessary adaptations to the social world. The persona serves a vital function. It allows us to belong, to participate, and to be accepted. Yet, Jung warned that over-identification with the persona leads to alienation from the authentic self. When applied to the reality that intelligent, ambitious women face, this teaching becomes deeply relevant. The modern woman is often expected to craft a carefully controlled persona, one that is competent but never threatening, confident but always agreeable, ambitious but quietly so. If she dares to step outside this narrow definition, she is often met with resistance not because of any fault in her behavior, but because she has violated the unspoken rules of the collective. Society still maintains contradictory expectations for women, and especially for women who are intelligent and outspoken. These contradictions form the psychological landscape in which women must navigate. On one hand, there is admiration for brilliance and leadership. On the other, there is suspicion and criticism when those qualities are embodied by women. Jung would see this contradiction as the result of unresolved archetypal energies. The female leader is still a new and largely unintegrated archetype in the collective psyche. While the culture may profess equality on the surface, the unconscious still associates assertiveness, power, and leadership with the masculine. When a woman steps into those roles authentically, she creates psychic dissonance in those around her. This dissonance is not merely intellectual, it is deeply emotional, often unconscious, and can be quite disruptive. People around her may not even realize why they are uncomfortable, they simply feel that something is off. The ambitious woman, then, is seen through a distorted lens. She is labeled aggressive, where a man would be seen as decisive. She is called bossy instead of assertive. She is told she is too much for the room, not because she actually is, but because the room was never designed to hold her. This mismatch between her true nature and societal expectation places a tremendous psychological burden on her. Jung would describe this as a failure of integration, not on her part, but on the part of the collective. The persona trap is not only imposed from outside, it is also internalized. Many intelligent women learn early in life that in order to be accepted, they must dim their light just enough to be palatable. They learn to make themselves small in conversations, to soften their insights, to present their knowledge in ways that don't challenge others too directly. Over time, this creates a split within the psyche, a division between the true self and the socially acceptable version. Jung called this the beginning of neurosis, the moment when the soul is divided against itself. The more a woman must deny parts of her authentic nature to survive in the external world, the more disconnected she becomes internally. This split is not without consequences. Internally, it can manifest as chronic anxiety, imposter syndrome, or a feeling of being fundamentally unseen. Externally, it leads to burnout, emotional withdrawal, and sometimes even the abandonment of ambition altogether. The intelligent woman begins to wonder, is the cost of success too high if it means silencing who I truly am? Jung would urge us to see this moment not as a personal failure, but as an opportunity for individuation. When the persona no longer serves the soul, it is time for transformation. Individuation, as Jung described it, is the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. It requires the dismantling of false identities and the integration of all aspects of the psyche, light and dark, masculine and feminine, known and unknown. For ambitious women, this journey often involves reclaiming the parts of themselves that were suppressed to fit the mold, the assertive voice, the bold ideas, the unapologetic confidence. But individuation also requires recognizing the persona itself and understanding its origins. Only by becoming conscious of the mask can one choose to set it aside. It is important to understand that the societal discomfort with ambitious women is not personal, it is archetypal. These women are not just individuals, they represent something larger. They are the forerunners of a new psychological integration, and their presence challenges outdated archetypes that still dominate the collective unconscious. This is why the backlash they face feels so intense. It is not merely about them. It is about what they symbolize. Jung taught that every transformation at the individual level contributes to the evolution of the collective. Therefore, when a woman refuses to shrink into her persona and chooses instead to live from her authentic self, she is not just liberating herself, she is helping shift the entire cultural narrative. But this is not a path without resistance. Society resists change because change threatens the stability of its structures, even if those structures are outdated. When ambitious women are criticized, they are often responding to unconscious forces far greater than themselves. The discomfort they generate in others is the beginning of awareness. It signals that the old archetypes are no longer sufficient to hold the new reality. Jung would argue that this tension is necessary for growth. The emergence of a new paradigm always comes with conflict. But conflict, when understood psychologically, is not to be avoided, it is to be examined, felt, and transformed. The process of healing this cultural split must begin with awareness. Women must become conscious of the persona they have been asked to wear, and question whether it truly serves them. At the same time, society must confront its discomfort with female power and examine its roots. Jung's work provides the framework for this by turning inward, by facing the shadow, and by embracing wholeness. The path forward is not one of conformity, but of authenticity. Only by embracing the fullness of who we are, without apology, can we begin to create a world where ambition in women is not a threat, but a necessity. Carl Jung taught that the psyche cannot be understood without acknowledging the deep, often unconscious images and patterns that shape how we see others and ourselves. Among these are archetypes, universal mental images that represent recurring themes across cultures and time. One of the most persistent and damaging archetypal distortions in our collective consciousness is the misinterpretation of female strength. The strong woman, when she refuses to be silent, is often not seen for her insight or clarity. Instead, she is labeled, dismissed, or misunderstood. She becomes the difficult woman, not because she is problematic, but because her presence activates unresolved tensions in the collective psyche. In Jungian psychology, the archetype of the strong woman threatens both men and women who have not yet made peace with the repressed aspects of their own personality. Jung called this the shadow, the rejected, denied parts of the self. When a woman asserts herself, especially with intelligence and conviction, she awakens these dormant parts in others. Her strength shines a light on what others have been trained to hide. And because facing the shadow is uncomfortable and often painful, many respond not with curiosity, but with defense. This defense often takes the form of projection. Instead of recognizing the discomfort as coming from within, people assign it to her, labeling her cold, arrogant, or too emotional. This misjudgment is rarely logical. It is emotional, irrational, and deeply rooted in the unconscious. Jung noted that when individuals cannot tolerate certain aspects of themselves, such as their own assertiveness, vulnerability, or ambition, they project these qualities onto others, often in exaggerated and distorted ways. A woman who is confident may be seen as domineering. One who is direct may be perceived as abrasive. The real issue is not her tone or her words, but what she represents in the unconscious minds of those around her. She becomes a symbol rather than a person, a trigger for unresolved inner material. Consider the historical weight carried by female archetypes in the collective unconscious. From the biblical Eve to the medieval witch, women who step outside prescribed boundaries have been viewed with suspicion. The witch, for example, is not just a mythical figure. She is an expression of society's fear of uncontained female power. She is the woman who does not ask for permission, who trusts her intuition, who challenges the known order. In Jungian terms, the strong assertive woman today may unconsciously embody this archetype for others, which is why the backlash she receives is often out of proportion to her behavior. She is not just a colleague, a leader, or a speaker. She becomes a symbol of chaos, a disruption to the collective persona. The challenge here is twofold. First, the strong woman must learn not to internalize the projections she receives. This is difficult, because repeated misjudgment and isolation can lead her to doubt herself. The labels placed on her, too difficult, too emotional, too ambitious, can take root if she does not recognize them as projections. Jung emphasized the importance of inner work to differentiate between the self and the persona, and between personal truth and collective illusion. For the strong woman, this means understanding that much of the resistance she faces is not about her at all. It is about the unresolved fears and distortions of those around her. Second, those who interact with strong women must begin to examine their reactions. When discomfort arises, the mature response is introspection, not projection. Jung encouraged people to look inward and ask, what part of myself is being challenged? Why does this person evoke such a strong response in me? Only by doing this can the projections begin to dissolve and genuine relationship emerge. Otherwise, the cycle continues. The strong woman is rejected, not because she is wrong, but because others cannot yet face what she brings to light. Another layer of this dynamic involves the societal narratives that still dominate our institutions. In many environments, strength is accepted in men and feared in women. This double standard is not just social, it is psychological. Jung described how societies, like individuals, have a collective shadow. This means that a culture may outwardly promote values like equality and empowerment while still unconsciously operating under old paradigms. The result is that strong women often walk into spaces that are not ready to receive them. Their presence alone challenges the unspoken rules. When they speak with clarity, they are seen as confrontational. When they lead, they are judged more harshly. These are not isolated incidents, but expressions of a broader collective conflict between emerging and outdated archetypes. What makes this particularly challenging is the emotional toll it takes. Being constantly misunderstood or labeled takes energy. It wears down the psyche. Over time, the strong woman may be tempted to shrink, to soften her edges, or to retreat. Jung warned against this kind of psychic repression. Suppressing vital parts of the self for the sake of acceptance leads not to wholeness but to fragmentation. The task, then, is not to become less, but to become more whole. This means embracing the discomfort, doing the inner work, and continuing to show up as one's full self, even when the environment is not yet capable of seeing it clearly. The ultimate goal, from a Jungian perspective, is integration, not only at the individual level but at the cultural level. The strong woman is not the problem, she is the call to evolve. Her presence reveals where growth is needed, both in individuals and in the systems they inhabit. She is a teacher, a mirror, and often, a healer. But she cannot fulfill this role if she is silenced or forced to conform to a distorted image. In this way, her strength is not merely personal, it is archetypal. She is part of a larger movement toward balance, toward the integration of masculine and feminine, intellect and intuition, strength and empathy. Her clarity is needed. Her voice is essential, and the discomfort she evokes is not a reason to quiet her, but a sign that something deep is being stirred. Jung would remind us that it is only by facing this discomfort, by bringing the unconscious into consciousness, that true transformation can begin. Carl Jung believed that the human journey is at its core a movement toward wholeness. He called this process individuation, the integration of all aspects of the self, both conscious and unconscious, into a unified whole. For women who speak up, who dare to claim space in a world that still resists their authority, individuation is not just a philosophical idea, it is a lived, often painful reality. These women are not merely engaging in acts of self-expression, they are navigating a spiritual and psychological transformation that requires immense inner strength. They are called to move beyond societal conditioning, beyond inherited roles and expectations, and into the truth of who they really are. And in doing so, they call forth a transformation not only in themselves but in the culture around them. Speaking up is more than the act of using one's voice. In Jungian psychology, it is a symbolic gesture, a confrontation with the unconscious forces that shape human behavior and social norms. The woman who speaks up challenges the collective persona, the social mask worn by institutions and communities that pretend all is well while maintaining deep structural imbalances. Her voice becomes the thread that unravels these illusions, but such unraveling does not come without consequence. She is often met with resistance, not because her message lacks truth, but because it threatens the status quo. Jung warned that when we disturb the unconscious, it fights back. The world resists those who expose its contradictions. The woman who dares to speak is performing an act of psychic integration. She brings to light what has long been denied or disowned within herself and within others. In many cases, she is not only confronting societal forces, but also confronting her own internalized voices of doubt, fear, and shame. These voices are often rooted in early experiences, cultural narratives, and generational patterns. Jung emphasized the importance of becoming conscious of these inherited structures so that we are not ruled by them unconsciously. The act of speaking, then, becomes a ritual of reclaiming power, a declaration that the inner authority is stronger than the external judgment. This process is deeply personal. Many women conditioned to value harmony over confrontation find it excruciating to risk disapproval. They have been taught, often without words, that to be good is to be quiet, to be likable is to be accommodating. So when a woman begins to speak her truth, she is not just breaking social norms, she is breaking a psychic contract. She is stepping outside the realm of the acceptable feminine and entering the wild, uncertain terrain of the true self. And it is here that individuation begins. Jung wrote that individuation requires us to separate from the collective, to find our own path rather than conform to the expectations of others. For women, this often means rejecting the false dichotomy between silence and aggression, between submission and rebellion, and finding a third way, the way of authenticity. This path is not linear. There are setbacks, moments of doubt, and periods of isolation. When a woman speaks out and faces backlash, whether it's subtle exclusion, overt criticism, or internal guilt, she is forced to make a choice. Will she retreat into silence to preserve comfort, or will she move forward, even if it means being misunderstood? Jung would say that this is the moment of transformation. When we face the fear of rejection and still choose to honor the self, we begin to integrate the shadow, the parts of us we were taught to hide. In doing so, we become more whole. But individuation is not just about personal development. It is about contributing to the evolution of the collective. Jung believed that every individual who integrates their unconscious contributes to the healing of the broader culture. When a woman speaks up, she is not just claiming her voice, she is modeling a new possibility for others. She becomes a living archetype of the integrated feminine, not silent, not angry, but wise, clear, and whole. Her voice invites others to examine their own fears and projections. She becomes a mirror through which others can see both their wounds and their potential. Yet this role is not always welcomed. Those still caught in unconscious patterns may resist her message, dismiss her insights, or label her as too much. But in Jungian thought, such reactions are not signs of failure, they are signs of impact. The unconscious resists transformation, and those who embody transformation become targets. But they are also vessels of change. The woman who continues to speak, even in the face of resistance, becomes a force of individuation, not only for herself, but for the society that surrounds her. To reach this place of inner authority, a woman must reconnect with her own instincts and intuition, what Jung called the inner guide. This guide speaks not through logic, but through symbols, dreams, and deep emotional truths. Many women who rediscover their voices describe it not as a decision but as a calling. Something inside them insists on being expressed. This is the self emerging, the organizing principle of the psyche that calls us toward wholeness. When a woman listens to this voice and acts upon it, she begins to live not according to societal scripts, but according to inner truth. The process of individuation is never finished. It is a continuous unfolding, a commitment to truth even when truth is costly. For women, this journey is particularly courageous because it often requires them to go against both external structures and internalized beliefs. But the reward is profound. When a woman speaks up and continues to speak, she steps into alignment with the self. She becomes not just a participant in culture, but a creator of it. Jung believed that such individuals are rare but essential. They are the ones who carry the future within them. In this way, the voice of a woman becomes more than a statement, it becomes a symbol. It represents the possibility of integration, the merging of light and shadow, strength and compassion, intellect and emotion. And in a world that often punishes women for speaking, the act of speaking becomes revolutionary, not because it changes everything immediately, but because it begins the deep, slow work of healing the collective soul. Throughout history, and within the depths of our collective unconscious, the voices of smart women who dare to speak up have often been met with resistance, misunderstanding, and punishment. Carl Jung's insights illuminate this enduring struggle, not as isolated social failings, but as profound psychological dynamics rooted in archetypes, projection, and the shadow. The challenge women face in claiming their voice is both deeply personal and undeniably collective. Yet in embracing authenticity, confronting the persona, and continuing the courageous journey of individuation, women do more than assert themselves, they catalyze transformation. Their voices ripple outward, challenging outdated paradigms, and inviting society toward greater wholeness. The punishment they endure is a sign not of weakness, but of the power they hold, a power that when fully integrated, holds the promise of healing the individual and the collective alike.